Hello, and welcome to another book review by John Henry. This is called The Jazz Age, Popular Music in the 1920s by Arnold Shaw. Arnold Shaw is a songwriter and composer and author of a few different books, mainly to do with music and music history and more modern in the 20th century anyway, and popular stuff. So he also, I don't know, he was like within the record industry. He had a title as well, not just as a songwriter. So good author, good person to tell you about a period of time of popular music. So why the jazz age? Why the 1920s? Well, one reason I've been interested in this for a long time, but being that it's 100 years now, what was the music scene in America, especially New York City, does talk a lot about New York City in the 1920s, 100 years ago. Very fascinating. A lot of similarities, but a lot of differences. And I don't know if I would have been in the music industry back then. Certainly not with this particular personality that I have. Of course, if you're in a time period, you're going to be built a little differently. But it was fast-paced. It was busy. There was tons of music from that time. I thought I knew some 1920 songs. Not really. I went to Brooklyn College, conservatory music in late 90s, early 2000s, and I took a class on jazz history. I took a class on American music history. So I covered these topics before, and that was very helpful. So there were some names I knew, and music, certainly words and themes that were familiar, but so much new stuff too. It's great. I'm a composer, singer, songwriter, so it's kind of matters to me to know, and I'm a historian, I guess amateur historian if you want. So this all matters to me. The jazz age. So it starts off with talking about flappers, and mentions the Fitzgeralds. F. Scott Fitzgerald and his wife, and so I'll read you some of the chapter titles, or the way it's divided, to kind of give you an idea what's in it. The introduction: Flappers Are We, and it just kind of expresses what is a flapper, how did it come about, and this kind of live for today type of spirit that happened kind of post World War I, when things are just so dark and unpredictable and shaky for so long. Then King Oliver, Jelly Roll, and Satchmo. So Satchmo was Louis Armstrong. King Oliver was kind of his, the guy who brought him up. Jelly Roll was this other guy who was involved in the picture and had his own band, and very questionable character, but significant. Jelly Roll Morton, a significant influence in early jazz composition. Then Bix Beiderbecke was this, he came from Midwest or something, white guy, and he got involved with jazz, and he was a great trumpet player, developed an alcohol problem. He played for a few different bands, the Chicago Style, Pops, and Smack. I think one of those is Louis Armstrong. I'm not sure who the two of them are. Then you got Duke, Ethel, and Harlem Scene. Didn't get too deep into Duke Ellington for some reason, but of course they mentioned him. Birth of the Blues. Of course, I guess Duke was pretty much after the 20s. It was more of his time, but he started in the 20s. Kitten on the Keys, Shuffle Along, Dardanella, The Sheik of Araby, 3 o'clock in the morning, Yes, We Have No Bananas, Charleston, Rhapsody and Romance in Blue, T for two, Tin Pan Alley, that's in the Tin Pan Alley section. There's the Jazz Age section, the Harlem Renaissance section, the Tin Pan Alley section. Some of the other, Black Bottom, talkies, and theme songs. So when the talkies come around, that's a big thing at the late 20s. The Singing Fool, California Gold Rush. What does it all mean? I don't know, but if you know about the 20s, maybe it means something to you. So, I'll just, before I describe the book and how it's written, I'll just read the rest of this. The musical theater they talk about in the 20s, and the musical review, the Golden Coterie, the operetta revival, and the song laureate of the Roaring Twenties. I think that was Cole Porter. And then there's a Variety Magazine's Golden 100 Tin Pan Alley songs, which is cool. There's bibliography, a discography. This was published, I believe, in 86, or maybe published 87, written 86. So, okay. This is a book only for people who are very interested in this stuff. There's no way anyone's gonna get past a couple pages if you're not deeply into it. When you cover a large, I read this 1980s book and I did a review on it last year. When you cover a large span of time, like a decade, with no specific person in mind or like group of people, you tend to get a book that's a little bit here, a little bit there. It's very hard to grasp onto because there's no through line of a story. You're just kind of trying to touch all the different flavors and aspects that were going on at a certain time period. And how else you can do it, right? But it's a little hard to read if you're not very curious about it. And so I would go on, it took me a long time to read this. And of course I would take tangents and I would listen to a lot of 1920s recordings. I also have a keen interest in I would say even 100 years before 1920s music too, for sure, in America anyway. But that's another video. So yeah, I would take side tangents, learn about certain composers or players that were big at that time. Watching some 1920s films isn't that helpful because there's no music. At least it probably wouldn't be authentic music from that time. They would add something that sounds like it, which was okay. And it was not till like 28 or so that the talkies started to have talking and a little bit of music. So you'd be better off watching movies from the 30s to get the idea of the music of the 20s, I guess. But I didn't go into movies that much. A little bit. Wikipedia's other composers and the songs they did. Trying to write a list of songs. You see, some music was not albums in the 20s. I don't know when albums started, but I'm guessing kind of, I don't know. I'm not going to speak on it. But I'm reading about the 50s now, and albums were not such a regular thing. I think the 60s became more normalized, like an artist puts out an album of songs. But certainly in the 20s, that wasn't really happening. You would get recordings. It would be a single with a B-side. That was a very common way to release music. Of course, you get collections of songs too. I don't really know what it was like going to the record store in the 20s or in the 10s. Would have been very fascinating. Probably a little pricey. Even though to our ears now the sound quality is so wanting, it's certainly shallow. I won't say it's bad, but it doesn't have that depth that we're used to nowadays. So sometimes you get an artist or a composer or somebody that they're talking about, a musician, and the writer will describe their life, and then you'll kind of feel like you're getting something. But of course, he's always jumping into what they did in the 30s and the 40s and 50s. Just, you know, how do you tell a story about someone if you're just like cutting it off? I'm not gonna say anything about the person after 1930. You know, you have to write something. You know, this is also written before internet, so he's just doing a lot of research across different books, different albums, and different magazine clippings, and his own personal experience. I don't know how much interviews he did for this book. So also I did a review on the history of the Catholic Church. I guess it was last year or something. And that was also a little bit similar, even though that was 2,000 years or whatever. This is only 10 years, but just similarly, you know, you try to tell something, but then it just goes in a bunch of different directions because the time period is it's pretty immense. You know, writing is linear. You know, you do one word at a time. So in this book, you know, I would often, you know, start learning about something, and then I would talk about, well, this composer and this composer wrote that song, or this songwriter, this lyricist worked on this. Then he would talk about that songwriter, and then he would talk about that lyricist. I did get confused a lot, I have to say. Because there's no really drama, and there's no really like story, we call it like resolution of anything. It's just information. And this song was hopping, and that song was hopping, and then this theater was filled, and then this theater wasn't filled, and there's no pictures in the book. So how do you really deeply grok it? Grok, I think that's a Star Trek word. How you deeply really understand or picture it, besides just like reading more about it, doing research in different areas. I don't know, but I do eventually want to put out an album of music from the 20s. I do have one single, Dinah, which is I've released officially. So if you love jazz history, if you're very curious about American history, particularly in entertainment, then I would definitely say this book is for you. And you know, take it lightly. You don't have to read it from beginning to end, although it is more or less written by year, more or less. Also by theme. It's just tricky thing to do. I'm not saying I could do it better. I think you did a great job with the information available, but it's a little bit, you know, it's hard to absorb that. But I'm very glad I read it because, you know, I want to learn more about the 20s. And there's a lot of names. I've got a lot of bits and pieces, a lot of song titles and musical titles. Now I'm much more aware that it's much more about the musical. It's about the reviews. It's about getting a hit song. Then that song pluggers was a big thing. And then getting those songs, the sheet music being sold so you can make profit. It wasn't so much about the audio recording. It was more about sheet music, it seems, from what I gather, in the 20s. I guess fading in, you know, there was certainly records being sold a lot at that time too. But sheet music was still very big. And yeah, these are people, the songwriters of, a lot of them was Tin Pan Alley, a lot of it was not necessarily Tin Pan Alley, it's more Broadway, and it's different ways that songs come into the popular consciousness. But the business was rough, and, you know, talks about gangs a little bit for sure. Very fast paced, and you could be big for a little while, then your next thing is not big. You always got to stay active, it seemed like at that time. So anyway, I do recommend it to those deeply interested. If not, don't really recommend it. I'm reading another Arnold Shaw book about the 50s right now, 50s music scene. And also Buddy Holly review coming soon. Okay, so all the best, keep reading, and see you on the next one.